With that, we're going to jump into the introductions for our speakers. First, Rachel Wilson is the wife of the coolest, smartest, handsomest guy ever, and researcher and author of Occult Feminism, The Secret History of Women's Liberation. Please join me in welcoming Rachel Wilson. And also introducing Craig, also known as Fight the Flat Earth, is an Englishman living in Scotland with 2 degrees and a YouTube career built on dismantling bad arguments, making this debate with Rachel basically a professional spa day for his brain. Known for, you can tell, they make me read both of these. They say, known for sharp humor, even sharper logic, and being annoyingly good at push-ups, he's here to show that feminism isn't the apocalypse and that evidence still beats vibes. Please join me in welcoming Craig. Well, we're thrilled to have you here. We are going to start it off with Rachel's opening statement. The timer is set for you, Rachel, for 15 minutes.
All right. So, thanks for being here, everybody. We're talking about feminism today and if it's good for society. So most people believe that feminism became this dominant political force that it is today due to oppression and abuse by the patriarchy. That it was a grassroots idea whose time had come. Women looked around them and they were like, oh no, we're oppressed. We should march and stuff until we can vote and things will get better. Not exactly how it went down. So surely if they achieved feminism, right, this would give them a better future, make them more safe, because most people believe that men are the primary threat to women's safety and security. Almost everyone in modern society believes that abusive marriages and oppression of women by the patriarchy was a fact of life, which made women miserable for all of history until about 100 years ago. But did you know that women didn't want liberation from the men in their lives? Most people don't know this. In fact, some of the most vehement opposition to women voting came from women themselves. These people were called anti-suffragettes, and they had much larger membership ranks than did the suffragettes themselves. It was far more popular. And these women who were in these anti-suffrage groups were not your average women who demanded feminism. I find their reasoning to be prescient and compelling, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what they believed right now. This is also why I think that this part of history has been obscured and most of you have never heard of it, because these women had some pretty good reasons, I think. So, in fact, when the option to add women's suffrage to the ballot was put forth in the referendums in multiple states, the measure was so unpopular with women that pro-suffrage groups actually moved to take that option off the ballot. That's right, a handful of feminists fighting for women's rights actually didn't want women to vote on whether or not they could vote. But don't believe me. Believe Susan B. Anthony, who said, "But the petitioners of suffrage are in the minority. There are many reasons for this, and one of them, paradoxical as it may seem, is because so much has already been gained. Woman in general now finds her needs very well supplied. If she wants to work, she has all occupations to choose from. If she desires an education, the schools and colleges are freely opened to her. If she wishes to address the public by pen or by voice, the people hear her gladly. The laws have been largely modified in her favor, and where they might press, they are seldom enforced. She may accumulate and control property. She may set up her own domestic establishment and come and go at will." Susan B. Anthony made this statement in her speech, The Status of Woman, Past, Present, and Future, which she delivered at the National Association for Women's Suffrage in Washington, D.C. in 1902. So in 1902, women already said, we kind of have everything we want. We kind of have it made. We don't really feel like we need this feminism stuff. In fact, we think that'll make things worse for us. So this, along with the rest of the historical record, kind of debunks this commonly held belief that women had no freedom to do anything prior to 1902. In 1914, the Nebraska Association Opposed to Women's Suffrage group published a pamphlet in response to a ballot initiative petition campaign proposed by the Nebraska Women's Suffrage Group. They accurately predicted that pushing women into the political sphere and the women's liberation movement in general would cause the breakdown of the family, division in marriages, and a lack of effort and focus on children and community, which had always been the main work of women up until this point. They also correctly pointed out that women enjoyed greater protection and privilege under patriarchy than was afforded to the liberated women. They believed, as I do, that women are much more influential and effective outside direct involvement in governing. They also wisely asserted that primary role of government is to protect people and property, and that men are the only ones capable of that task, see force doctrine. Therefore, burdening women with the task of which they are incapable is inappropriate and detrimental to women themselves. Why would we ask them to do something they're not capable of doing? These women predicted outcomes like the birth rate dropping from an average of 5 children per family in 1870, just prior to first wave feminism kicking off, to an average of just 2 children by 1940. That's a staggering drop. They were correct in predicting that feminism would inevitably result in the attempted demonization and domination of men. And anti-suffragists were right to ask, who will take care of the children? If we push women into the workforce, who raises the kids? Well, the overall number of US children under 5 with mothers working outside the home in 1900 was less than 6%. By 2012, that number jumped to 58%. The anti-suffragists were also right about what the future of marriage and family would look like if we instituted these sweeping social changes. In 1900, the rate of births outside marriage was only 4%. By 2010, not quite a century after the passage of the 19th Amendment, that rate of out-of-wedlock births had reached 41%. But did feminism deliver on its promise to protect women and children from dangerous men? Let's look at the evidence. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has been tracking data on child abuse and neglect since 1978 with something called the National Incidence Study, or the NIS. The NIS is a congressionally mandated periodic effort of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. There have been 4 of these reports. The latest one came out in 2010. This includes a breakdown of data collected nationwide on child abuse and neglect by living situation. This section of the study opens as follows. Figure 5.9 shows the incident rates of endangerment standard maltreatment for the different family structure and living arrangement subgroups of children. The rate of overall endangerment standard maltreatment for children living with 2 married biological parents is about 16 per 1,000, and this is significantly lower than the rates for children in all other circumstances, which is 52 or more children per 1,000. Kids living with one parent whose unmarried partner was in the household had the highest incident of maltreatment. This is equivalent to more than 13 per 100 children, or more than 1 child in 8 whose single parent has a cohabitating partner in the general child population. Their risks of maltreatment is more than 8 times higher than that of children living with 2 married biological parents. And we're going to see this just repeated throughout the data, that children living with a single parent with an unmarried partner had the highest incidence of physical abuse by far, more than 10 times the lowest rate. So maybe this no-fault divorce stuff is not so great for kids, huh? Only 0.7 children per 1,000 children living with 2 married biological parents were sexually abused, compared to 12 per 1,000 children living with a single parent who had an unmarried partner. So that's more than 12 times. The lowest incidence of physical neglect occurred for children living with both married bio parents. The highest rate of physical neglect occurred for children living with a single parent and cohabitating partner, most commonly single mom plus boyfriend. This is over 7 times greater than kids living with both married bio parents. Same for physical abuse, same for emotional abuse, it just repeats. But perhaps the most relevant and more surprising finding was this. 68% of the maltreated children were maltreated by a female, whereas 48% were maltreated by a male. Some were maltreated by both. In contrast, male perpetrators were more common for children maltreated by non-biological parents or parents' partners. So once again, single mom plus boyfriend. The statistic is the most illustratory piece of data proving that removing children's biological fathers from the home is the single biggest risk factor for abuse. This supports my assertion that fathers, the family patriarchs, have the most interest and biggest protective effect on the lives of children. They're less likely to abuse than biological mothers, and once removed, make single mother homes an easy target for predators who are not related to the child. The second point I want you guys to understand today is that mothers are actually more likely to abuse or neglect children than fathers, by a pretty large margin. In 2021, about 211,000 children in the United States were abused by their mother, whereas 132 were abused by their father. This is consistent with these same findings we've been discussing all across the NIS data. Defenders of feminism object to these data by pointing out that mothers are more likely to be primary caregivers and spend the most time with the kids. But we can kind of test this hypothesis because there's a trend where men have gained far more custody and parenting time over the years, about 4.5 times more between 1968 and 2020. Given this, we would expect to see those abuse rates by fathers going up if they're spending 4.5 times more time with them. That's not what we see. It's just consistent over the last 45 years. That rate did not go up. A more likely explanation of why we see a larger share of mothers abusing children might be that women are much more prone to mental problems. In fact, we see increases in women struggling with mental health problems over recent decades, and women are about 3 times more likely than men to experience mental health problems. According to an analysis of prescription drug data, more than a quarter of American women, 26%, take a psychiatric prescription drug compared to just 15% of men. Here's some quick stats from the CDC about risks to children who grow up without their dads. Children from fatherless homes represent 90% of homeless kids, 85% of kids with behavioral disorders, 70% of kids in juvenile facilities, 71% of kids in adolescent substance abuse treatment centers. So across the board, the highest risk factor for bad outcomes for kids is broken homes and not having dad around. And one of the primary objectives of early feminism and also second wave was to get rid of no-fault divorce, get rid of marriage through the church, and make it just a state certificate that you can get out of easier than your cell phone contract. But what might surprise you even more than this is that men are not more likely to be perpetrators of domestic violence. Women are. Analyzing data gathered from 11,370 respondents, researchers found that half of violent relationships were reciprocally violent, meaning both people are committing the violence. In non-reciprocally violent relationships, the women were the perpetrators in more than 70% of cases. In one study, 1,100 lesbian or bisexual women in abusive lesbian relationships, researchers found that the women were more likely to have experienced violence in past relationships with women than with men. Feminism has promoted cohabitation rather than marriage for decades as a way to protect women from abusive marriages. Unfortunately, the data here is against them as well. A large study by Manning et al. Notes that cohabitation is associated with several factors that have the potential to reduce children's well-being. Cohabitation is a marker of family instability and is strongly associated with poorer outcomes for kids. Children born to cohabitating parents see their parents break up more often than children born to married parents. This is setting the stage for instability, and these kids are more likely to experience enduring deficits of psychosocial well-being. So finally, the expansion of the welfare state correlates directly to the rise in out-of-wedlock births. Welfare spending in 1950 was $50 billion. The non-marital birth rate then was 4%. By 2010, welfare spending increased 14 times to a whopping $700 billion, and this is adjusted for inflation. And the non-marital birth rate then rose to 41%. The same people who got the 19th shoved through also met in secret to write the Federal Reserve Act, as well as the federal income tax and compulsory education laws right around the same time. This effectively atomizes the family and means the government is your daddy now, America. This is great for transnational corporations, governments, predators, and the predator class. These same groups are masters at propaganda and public relations. According to Professor Joe C. Miller, who did a comprehensive analysis of college textbooks about the history of women's liberation, found that many of the important facts I noted here were intentionally removed from history textbooks over the course of decades as the field of women's studies was developed. And this was a liberal professor, guys. This wasn't some kind of right-winger. And he was shocked at this finding. But this is why almost everything people believe about the history of feminism is wrong. 100 years of propaganda throughout the culture and the institutions. If you want to know how we got here, there's your answer.
Thank you very much for that opening. Excellent. We'll switch it over to Craig for his 15-minute opening as well.
Hello. First off, I do want to say I'm a little angry at you coercing your husband into renting out an entire bar just to get me drunk before our debate. It's a little harsh. Conveniently, she didn't drink very much. Right, you ready to have this mansplained to you? Yeah, good. If I get
That was one of my jokes. You ruined it already.
if I get hungry, you can go to make me a sandwich, okay? Right. Morning, everyone. How you doing? I'm here today to debate the lovely Rachel Wilson, who's written a book claiming feminism was basically invented by witches, CIA spies, and probably a couple of magic mushrooms along the way. If that sounds less like history and more like the rejected script for Stranger Things Season 5, then you're not wrong. Let's be clear, feminism is not an occult ritual, it's not a CIA psyop, it's definitely not a satanic plot to overthrow the nuclear family. It's the radical idea, well, radical back then, not really now, that women are human beings who should have the same rights as men, and that's it. It's not hard, it's not mystical, and it's not demonic. Before feminism, women couldn't vote, own property in many places, or even have their own bank accounts without a man's permission. In the 60s, women in the UK could be fired just for getting married. In the US, marital rape wasn't fully criminalized until the mid-90s, and that's not ancient history, that's pretty much yesterday. Rachel will claim things like women didn't even want the vote. Great claim, zero evidence. The moment women could vote, they turned out in huge numbers. The historical record is full of church women, union women, activist women, mothers, teachers, nurses, ordinary women organizing for suffrage. If your argument relies on pretending they didn't exist, then your argument is dead on arrival. Should also tell you feminism makes women less happy. Also, zero evidence. No serious study shows women were happier when they had no legal autonomy, no financial independence, and no escape from abusive marriages. Even if someone digs up one cherry-picked graph from a think tank that hates women working, happiness is complicated. You can't just point to modern stress and say, yes, must be the equality that did it. That's the way astrologists think. And then there's my favorite, the forced doctrine argument that Rachel and Jim Bob and Jake all love, that men are stronger. Ooh, look at my muscles. Therefore, we have given women rights out of benevolence. No, rights weren't given. They were won. Women organized, protested, lobbied, marched, starved themselves, chained themselves to railings, got arrested, got beaten, got force-fed, and refused to shut up. If feminism were just men being sweethearts, it wouldn't have taken 100 years of fighting to get a ballot paper. And here is the actual kicker. When societies give women equal rights, things improve. Education goes up, domestic violence actually goes down. Health outcomes improve, poverty shrinks, economies grow faster. Every major organization on earth, from the United Nations to the World Bank, backs that. The only people who don't are YouTube commentators who type with one hand while Googling how to talk to women. Rachel will tell you feminism is a conspiracy, that it's witches, demons, elites, CIA culture warfare, goddess worship, you name it, but here's the truth. Movements with millions of participants over 100 years don't start with a seance. They start with injustice. Feminism didn't appear because a demon whispered it into somebody's ear. It appeared because women were sick of being treated like unpaid labor with no rights and no escape. And look, credit where it's due. Rachel wrote a fantastic book, which is actually a great example of feminism working. A woman publishing, speaking publicly, influencing society, debating ideas on stage. That is feminism in action. She's literally doing the thing that says women, that she says women shouldn't be doing. Rachel, you are your own feminist success story. Feminism gives us female doctors, astronauts, scientists, prime ministers, Nobel Prize winners, and I mean real ones, like Marie Curie, Toni Morrison, I'll probably pronounce some of these names wrong, Mara Yousafzai, and Tu Youyou. It gave us leaders like Margaret Thatcher, Angela Merkel, Jacinda Ardern, and trailblazers like Katherine Johnson, whose maths put humanity on the moon. And let's be honest, it's also give us wives who roll their eyes at their husbands but still keep us alive. Behind every great man, there is a woman with her arms crossed, waiting for him to finally admit that she was right all along. So Rachel, you can talk about witches, conspiracies, pagan goddesses, shadowy elites, CIA plots, all you like. I will stick to history, evidence, and basic reality. Feminism isn't optional. Equality isn't optional, and women being amazing, capable, brilliant human beings is also not optional. If that bothers you, well, tough. Equality is happening with or without your permission.